I almost didn't take that flight. Sadie had a volleyball tournament that weekend, and I'd promised myself I'd be home for it. But the Davenport job had run long, 2 extra weeks of exterior work, because the homeowner kept changing her mind about colors. And when the last coat dried and the final check cleared, I booked the earliest seats back I could find. Meridian Air, Flight 1140, nonstop, row 22, middle seat, because that's what was left. I was 58 years old, carrying a lunch pail and a paint-spattered duffel, and I looked exactly like what I was. A house painter heading home. Nobody in that terminal gave me a second glance, and that was fine by me. I'd stopped needing second glances a long time ago. I sat down between a young woman with noise-canceling headphones and a heavy-set man already, asleep before the door closed. I buckled in, pulled out the crossword Sadie had clipped for me from the Sunday paper, and that was that. Just a quiet man in a middle seat, going home. We were 2 hours and 11 minutes out of Davenport when it started. I felt the turbulence first, that low, rolling shudder that most passengers don't recognize but that I always will. Then the altitude drop, subtle but real, maybe 300 feet in 6 seconds. Not weather, something else. I set down the crossword. The flight attendant in the forward galley, young, maybe 24, name tag reading Carla, came up the aisle quickly and disappeared behind the cockpit door. 30 seconds later, she came back out. Her face was the color of chalk. I've spent 31 years reading faces at altitude, and hers told me everything before she opened her mouth. She picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need any medical personnel on board to please identify themselves." Her voice held barely. 3 rows ahead of me, a nurse named Patricia raised her hand and moved forward without hesitation. I watched the clock on my watch. 4 minutes. 5. The plane held altitude, but the heading was drifting. I could feel it in the seat, that gentle, lazy yaw that means nobody's hand is steady on the controls. Carla came back out. She was scanning the cabin now, and I could see her trying to keep her expression neutral. She was not succeeding. She said quietly, to no one in particular, "Is there anyone on board who has experience flying a commercial aircraft?" The cabin went still. People looked at each other. The heavy-set man beside me woke up and frowned. I raised my hand. She almost didn't see it. I wasn't the kind of man who commands a room. Paint under my fingernails, a Hargrove County Little League cap, a crossword puzzle on the tray table. But she saw the hand, and she came to me, and she leaned down and said, "Sir, the captain has had a cardiac event. The first officer is the only one at the controls, but he took a very hard impact to his shoulder, and he's not able to hold the heading. We've been out of radio contact for 4 minutes. I don't know what to do." I looked at her for a moment, then I unbuckled. "My name is Walt Greer," I said. "I need you to take me to the cockpit." She did. What I found behind that door was a young first officer named Kyle Pratt. Couldn't have been more than 26. Leaning sideways in his seat, right arm held against his chest, face gray with pain, the controls riding loose in his left hand. The captain, a man I didn't know, was slumped in the left seat, and Patricia was beside him, working. The radio console was showing a fault light on the primary transceiver. Secondary was live. Kyle looked at me the way a drowning man looks at a rope. He didn't ask who I was. He just said, "Can you fly this?" "Yes," I said. "Move right. I'm taking the left seat." I want to be honest about what that felt like. I had not touched a set of controls in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I knew the number because Sadie's birthday is the day I retired, and I'd taken her to the diner and told her, over a piece of coconut cake, that I was done flying so I could be home when she needed me. That was the day. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. But 31 years and 14,000 hours don't leave a man. They live in the hands. I settled into the left seat, took the yoke, and felt the aircraft immediately. The weight of it, the resistance, the slight disagreement between what the autopilot wanted and what the airframe was actually doing. I reached for the secondary radio. "Davenport approach. This is Meridian 1140. Do you copy?" Static. Then, "Meridian 1140. Davenport approach. We've been trying to reach you. Go ahead." "Davenport approach. I'm declaring an emergency on Meridian 1140. Captain is incapacitated. First officer is injured and non-flying. I have the controls. Request immediate vectors for approach to runway 26 left. I need priority handling, and I need you to have emergency services standing by." A beat. Then the controller's voice, professional and steady, the way the good ones always are. "Meridian 1140. Say your qualifications. Retired ATP. License number Alpha Tango 22744 Foxtrot. 31 years, 14,000 hours. I'm current on type." Another beat. Longer this time. I was already bringing the heading around, nice and smooth, nothing abrupt, letting the aircraft settle into the new vector while I scanned the instruments. Altitude, airspeed, fuel state, all workable. The right engine was showing a fluctuation I didn't love, but nothing I hadn't seen before. The controller came back. His voice was different now. Not faster, not louder, but cleaner. Precise. Meridian 1140, copy. Emergency services are rolling. You are cleared for priority approach. Runway 26 left. Descend and maintain 8,000. When able, advise souls on board and fuel remaining. 141 souls, fuel remaining approximately 2.4 hours. Descending to 8,000. Behind me, Kyle said quietly, "That engine 2 fluctuation started about 20 minutes before you came in." "I see it," I said. "It's going to hold." He was quiet for a moment. "Then how do you know?" "Because it has to," I said. That wasn't bravado. That was the math of fatherhood. When your reason for landing is a 14-year-old girl with a volleyball tournament, the engine holds. I flew that airplane for 38 minutes. I won't pretend it was easy. The right engine kept its fluctuation right through final approach, and there was a 20-knot crosswind component I had to fight on short final that made the last 200 feet of descent feel like an argument. Kyle called airspeeds from the right seat with his good arm, steady and clear, and I want the record to show that boy was braver than most people know, sitting there with a dislocated shoulder, doing his job. Patricia had the captain stable in the back. Carla had the cabin quiet and seated and ready, and I don't know how she managed it, but she did. Davenport Approach handed me off to tower at 5 miles out, and I ran through the final checklist the way I have thousands of times. Gear down and locked, flap setting, landing lights on, brake pressure confirmed. The checklist doesn't know it's been 4 years. The checklist just is what it is, and your hands either know it or they don't. Mine knew it. Meridian 1140, you are cleared to land. 2 discs left, wind 240 at 18, gusting 23. Emergency equipment is in position. Cleared to land 1140, I said. Kyle said quietly, "From the right seat, runway in sight." "I've got it," I said, and I did. At 800 feet, I called for flaps to full. At 500, I had the runway centered. The crosswind pushed at the nose, and I held a crab into it, waiting, and at 200 feet, I kicked the rudder and brought the nose around, and the runway slid under me exactly where it should be. At 100 feet, I said to no one in particular, "Here we go." The wheels touched at runway 26 left at 4:17 in the afternoon, right main first, then the left, then the nose, and it was the smoothest landing I'd had in a long time. The aircraft rolled out, and I got on the brakes and brought her to a stop, and the emergency vehicles were already on either side of us before we'd even cleared the active. Kyle put his good hand on my arm and said one word, "How?" I didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that fit. You spend 31 years doing something, it doesn't leave you just because you hung up the uniform. That's all it was. They took the captain off first. Last I heard, he made it. The EMTs came aboard for Kyle next, and he kept apologizing to me for something, though I couldn't figure out what. I told him to stop. The passengers didn't move for a long moment after we stopped. Then someone started clapping, slowly, and it built, and I sat in that left seat and looked out at the runway lights coming on in the late afternoon, and thought about Sadie and the crossword puzzle, still sitting on tray table 22. I walked back through the cabin to get my duffel. I kept my head down, the way I always have. A woman in row 14 grabbed my hand as I passed and held it for a moment without saying anything. The heavyset man who'd been asleep since takeoff was awake now, and when I got to my row, he looked at me and said, "You the one who flew the plane?" "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded, once, the way men of a certain age nod when words aren't enough. Outside, on the tarmac, there was a woman in a Davenport approach vest waiting for me, the controller who'd worked my approach. She was about 40, short, professional, and she shook my hand with both of hers and said, "Alpha Tango 22744 Foxtrot. I looked you up while you were on final. 31 years. You were flying 737s before most of my team was born." "A long time ago," I said. "Not so long," she said. The airport operations chief found me 10 minutes later, and then there was a man from Meridian Air's operations center and a representative from the NTSB, and by the time I got through the terminal and outside to the pickup area, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and I had 4 missed calls from Sadie. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring, the way she always does. "Dad, it's all over the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Sorry I missed the first set." "Dad." Her voice went quiet, the way it does when she's working something out. "You flew the plane. I was just the closest one who knew how." She was silent for a moment. Then, "I told you those hands were still good." She had told me that. 2 years ago, when I was patching drywall in her bedroom, and she watched me work and said, out of nowhere, that I had the steadiest hands of anyone she'd ever seen. I'd laughed and said they were a house painter's hands now. She'd given me the look she gives me, the one that's too old for 14, and said, They were still the same hands. She was right. They're always the same hands. I found my truck in long-term parking and sat behind the wheel for a while before I started the engine. The crossword was still in my duffel. I'd never finished it. I pulled it out and looked at the last clue Sadie had circled for me. She circles the hard ones, leaves the easy ones for me to feel smart about, and it said, "What stays with you whether you use it or not?" 7 letters. I filled in MASTERY, then I drove home. Sadie was on the front porch when I pulled up, still in her volleyball clothes, and she came off that porch at a run the way she's done since she was 4 years old, and I'd pull into the driveway after a long trip. I caught her the same way I always have. "You okay?" she said into my shoulder. "I'm okay," I said. We stood there in the driveway for a while, the way fathers and daughters do when the words aren't the point. She pulled back and looked at me. Mom always said you were the best she'd ever seen. She hadn't said that to me in a long time. I had to look at the tree line for a moment before I could answer. "She was a little biased," I said. Sadie shook her head. "She was a pilot. She knew." I couldn't argue with that. So I put my arm around her shoulders and walked her inside, and we ate dinner, and she told me about the tournament, and I listened to every word. Later, when she was doing homework at the kitchen table, I sat across from her with the crossword finished in my pocket and a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I thought about 31 years and 14,000 hours, and a quiet man in a middle seat who looked like nothing at all. Sadie looked up at me over her notebook. "You're going to be on television," she said. "Probably," I said. She went back to her work. "Try not to look like a house painter," she said. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed all day, and it felt like a landing. Right mane, left mane, nose, smooth all the way down. These are my hands. They were always my hands. I just went home.